I never thought that the family who raised me to be quiet, compliant, and grateful would one day be begging for my forgiveness. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. My name is Mary Catherine, and at 68 years old, I finally learned what it meant to have a voice that couldn't be silenced. Growing up as the middle child in a family of 5 kids in suburban Chicago, I learned early that keeping the peace was my job. My older brother David was the golden child, destined for greatness according to my parents. My younger sister Linda was the baby, coddled and protected. And me? I was the responsible one, the one who made sure everyone else's needs were met before my own. My parents, Robert and Helen, weren't cruel people, but they had very specific ideas about what each of their children should become. David would be the successful businessman, Linda would marry well, and I would be the caretaker, the one who held everything together. From the time I was 12, I was watching my younger siblings while my parents worked double shifts at the factory. I cooked dinner, helped with homework, and made sure everyone had clean clothes for school. When my grandmother moved in with us during her final years, guess who became her primary caregiver? When my parents needed someone to co-sign loans or help with bills, guess who they turned to? It was always Mary Catherine. Reliable, dependable Mary Catherine who never complained and always said yes. I married my college sweetheart, Tom, when I was 23. He was a kind man, a high school English teacher who shared my love of books and quiet evenings at home. We had 2 children, Sarah and Michael, and I threw myself into motherhood with the same dedication I'd shown my family of origin. I worked part-time as a librarian while raising the kids, always making sure everyone else's dreams came first. Tom wanted to pursue his master's degree. I picked up extra shifts. The kids needed money for college. I dipped into my small savings account without hesitation. But here's what nobody knew about me during all those years of putting everyone else first. Late at night, after the dishes were done and the family was asleep, I wrote. I had notebooks hidden in my bedroom closet, filled with stories about women who found their voices, who stood up for themselves, who refused to be invisible. Writing was my secret rebellion, my way of imagining a different life. I wrote about characters who said no, who walked away from toxic situations, who chose themselves for once. It was pure fantasy to me then, these stories of women with backbones. When Tom died suddenly of a heart attack at 64, I was devastated. We'd been married 41 years, and he'd been my anchor, my safe harbor in a world that constantly demanded more from me than I felt I could give. The grief was overwhelming, but even in my darkest moments, my family's expectations didn't change. If anything, they intensified. Suddenly, I wasn't just the family caretaker, I was the family bank. David, now a moderately successful insurance agent with expensive tastes and poor financial planning, started calling me regularly. His wife, Jennifer, had champagne tastes on a beer budget, and they'd overextended themselves on a house they couldn't afford. Shio's mom always said, "Family helps family." He'd remind me whenever he needed money. And I'd write the check because that's what I'd always done. Linda, who'd married and divorced 3 times, each time walking away with less than she'd started with, also had her hand out regularly. Her current boyfriend was Kreise between jobs, Hanbat, which seemed to be a permanent state for the men she chose. "Ha, you're so good with money, Mary Cat. Chisti," she'd say, using the childhood nickname that made me feel small. "Chas, just a loan until I get back on my feet." Has. My own children weren't much better. Sarah, a social worker with a heart of gold and a complete inability to manage money, was constantly in crisis. Her student loans, her car payments, her rent in expensive downtown Chicago, where she insisted on living to be close to her work with underprivileged kids. Michael, who'd inherited his father's love of literature but none of his practical sense, was pursuing a PhD in comparative literature while working part-time at a coffee shop. Both of them were good people, but they'd learned from watching their extended family that Mom was the solution to every financial problem. The requests started small after Tom's death, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. But as the months passed and my savings account dwindled, the amounts grew larger, and the justifications grew thinner. David needed $15,000 for a down payment on a new car because his credit was shot. Linda needed $8,000 to help her boyfriend start a landscaping business. Sarah needed $5,000 to cover the security deposit and first month's rent on a new apartment after her roommate moved out unexpectedly. Michael needed $3,000 to attend a conference in Europe that would really advance his academic career. I said yes to all of it. I always said yes. Even as I watched my retirement fund shrink, even as I started eating generic cereal and shopping at thrift stores to make ends meet, I kept saying yes. Because that's what I'd been trained to do my entire life. That's who Mary Catherine was, the woman who sacrificed so everyone else could have what they wanted. The breaking point came on a cold February morning, almost 2 years after Tom's death. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements, trying to figure out how I was going to make my mortgage payment. I'd already borrowed against my life insurance policy. I'd cashed in my small 401k early, paying the penalties. I was 66 years old, widowed, and essentially broke because I'd given away everything I had to family members who saw my generosity as their birthright. That's when I found the letter. It was tucked inside one of Tom's old books, a copy of Hiddenstories, A Room of One's Own, Onkinds, by Virginia Woolf that he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. The letter was in his handwriting, dated just a month before his death. He must have hidden it there, knowing I'd find it eventually, knowing I'd need to hear his words when the time was right. See, my dearest Mary Catherine, it began, Hi. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably giving away everything we worked for to people who don't appreciate your sacrifice. I've watched you your whole life, put everyone else first, and while I admire your generous heart, I've also seen how it's cost you. You have stories to tell, my love. You have a voice that deserves to be heard. Stop hiding your light under a bushel. Stop making yourself small so others can feel big. The world needs what you have to offer, but first, you need to believe you deserve to offer it. I sat in that kitchen and cried for an hour. Then I did something I'd never done before. I went to my closet, pulled out all those notebooks filled with my secret stories, and I started typing. I spent the next 6 months turning 30 years of hidden writing into a novel. It was the story of a woman who'd spent her life being invisible, who'd given everything to everyone else, until one day she decided to save herself instead. I called it Ove, the Invisible Woman's Rebellion, Eyes. And it was raw, honest, and real in a way that surprised even me. I wrote about the guilt that comes with saying no, about the way families can suffocate you with their expectations, about the courage it takes to choose yourself when you've been trained to choose everyone else. I wrote about grief and loss and the way tragedy can either break you or teach you what really matters. Finding an agent was harder than I'd expected. I sent out dozens of query letters, collected rejection after rejection. But I didn't give up. For the first time in my life, I was fighting for something that was mine, something I'd created, something that mattered to me more than keeping the peace or making everyone else happy. Then, on a Tuesday morning in September, I got the call that changed everything. Literary agent Patricia Hendricks from one of New York's most prestigious agencies wanted to represent my book. This is exactly what the market needs right now, she told me. Stories about women finding their power later in life, about family dynamics and setting boundaries. This could be big, Mary Catherine. Really big. She wasn't wrong. Within 3 weeks, we had a bidding war between 4 major publishers. The final offer came from Beacon Press, one of the most respected literary publishers in the country. $800,000 for a 3-book deal, with the first book scheduled for publication in 18 months. $800,000 for stories I'd written in secret, for words I'd never believed anyone would want to read. I didn't tell my family right away. I needed time to process what had happened, to understand that my life had fundamentally changed. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I had something that was entirely mine, something that nobody could take from me or guilt me into sharing. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially when you're dealing with a family that's used to having access to your financial information. David found out first, of course. He'd been pressuring me for months to co-sign a loan for a boat, of all things. When I kept refusing, he'd gotten suspicious and somehow convinced our bank to give him information about my accounts. The ethics of that are questionable at best, but David had always been good at charming people into giving him what he wanted. He called me on a Thursday evening, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Just so you've been holding out on us, huh, Mary Cat? 800 grand and you're crying poor mouth when your own brother needs help? Shh!" I felt that familiar flutter of panic in my chest, the same feeling I'd had as a child when I'd disappointed my parents. But then I remembered Tom's letter, remembered the months I'd spent writing and rewriting my story, remembered the validation of having a professional tell me my words had value. "Jum, it's not your money, David," I said quietly. "Quand, it's mine. I earned it. These. Jean. Family money is family money." "Jum," he shot back. "Jean. Mom and Dad always taught us that. You can't just hoard it while the rest of us struggle." That's when something inside me snapped. "Archie, struggle? You want to buy a boat, David. That's not struggling, that's wanting a toy you can't afford. And I'm not hoarding anything, I'm protecting my future for the first time in my life." The conversation ended with him hanging up on me, but I knew it was just the beginning. Within hours, my phone was ringing constantly. Linda, crying about how I'd betrayed the family. Sarah, disappointed that I hadn't told her about the book deal. Michael, confused about why I was being so secretive and weird. Even my elderly mother called, having been filled in by David, to express her concern about my sudden selfishness. Nost. If you're enjoying this story and can relate to family dynamics like these, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of finding your voice. The next few weeks were brutal. My family launched what I can only describe as a coordinated campaign to wear me down. They used every manipulation tactic in the book. Guilt. Rise after everything we've done for you. Fond gaslighting. Means. You're not acting like yourself. Maybe you should see a doctor. Means. False urgency. Means. If you don't help me now, I'll lose everything. Means. Emotional blackmail. I guess I know where I stand in your priorities. David showed up at my house unannounced, bringing Jennifer and their 2 teenage kids. "Knew the kids need college funds. See," he announced, as if that settled the matter. "Tease, you can set up education accounts for them. It's the responsible thing to do." Linda came by with her boyfriend, a man I'd never met who immediately started talking about his business opportunities' sake, and how a small investment from me could set everyone up for life. See, when I politely declined, Linda accused me of being jealous of her happiness. Sarah tried a different approach, appealing to my maternal instincts. "Yeah, I'm proud of you for writing a book, Mom. I really am. But you raised us to believe that family comes first. I'm drowning in debt, and you have more money than you could ever spend. How is that fair?" Michael, my sweet, impractical son, was perhaps the most hurtful. "Dad would be disappointed in you," he said during one particularly difficult conversation. He always said you were the most generous person he knew. What happened to that woman?" Oh. Each conversation left me feeling smaller, more confused, more guilty. These were the people I loved most in the world, and they were all telling me I was wrong, selfish, changed. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe family really should come first, the way it always had. But then I'd go back to my writing, to the second book I was working on, and I'd remember who I was becoming. I'd read the early reviews of my first book, which had started circulating in the publishing industry. Remain, a powerful debut that gives voice to the invisible women among us. And beautifully written and emotionally honest. A story that needed to be told. These weren't just polite compliments. These were professional reviewers saying my work mattered, that my voice had value. The pressure from my family intensified as my book's publication date approached. They seemed to think that once the money was actually in my account, I'd come to my senses and start distributing it according to their expectations. David had even gone so far as to make a list of who should get what, as if he were dividing up an inheritance. Look, I've been reasonable about this, he told me during one of his increasingly frequent visits. I'm not asking for half or anything crazy like that. Just enough to pay off the house and maybe get that boat. 200,000 tops. You'll still have plenty left over. $200,000 is not a small amount of money, David, I replied. And it's not yours to ask for. It's not about the money, Jennifer chimed in, though her designer handbag and fresh manicure suggested otherwise. It's about family loyalty. It's about remembering where you came from. That phrase, remembering where you came from, became their rallying cry. As if where I came from was a place of servitude, a place where my value was measured only by what I could provide for others. As if growing beyond that place was somehow a betrayal of my roots. The worst part was how they made me doubt myself. Late at night, I'd lie awake, wondering if they were right. Was I being selfish? Had success changed me in ways I couldn't see? Was I abandoning the values that had shaped me? But then I'd think about the years I'd spent making myself smaller so others could feel bigger. I'd think about the dreams I'd deferred, the opportunities I'd passed up, the parts of myself I'd buried to keep everyone else comfortable. I'd think about Tom's letter and his belief that I had something valuable to offer the world. The breaking point came 3 weeks before my book's official release date. I was at home, working on edits for my second novel, when I heard voices in my backyard. I looked out to see David, Linda, Sarah, and Michael all standing on my patio, clearly having planned this intervention without my knowledge. I opened the back door, and David immediately took charge. So, we need to talk, Mary Cat. All of us. This has gone on long enough. They filed into my kitchen like a tribunal, arranging themselves around my table with the kind of serious expressions usually reserved for funerals. Sarah, who I'd always thought was the most reasonable of my children, had been elected spokesperson. Sorry, Mom. We're worried about you, she began. This whole book thing has changed you. You're not the same person who raised us, who taught us about family and generosity and putting others first. Jackie. Trent. We've all talked, Michael added, Rashi, and we think you might be having some kind of breakdown. Grief can do strange things to people. Can't. Linda nodded sagely. Yes, it's not normal for someone your age to suddenly become so ambitious, so focused on yourself. David leaned forward, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he'd perfected in his insurance sales career. Look, we get it. You wrote a book, and that's great. We're proud of you. But your acting like this makes you some kind of celebrity or something. You're still our sister, our mother. You still have responsibilities to this family. I sat there listening to them dissect my character, my mental health, my motivations, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. Pure, clean anger. Not the guilty, complicated anger I'd felt when they'd pressured me for money, but righteous fury at being told that my success was somehow a symptom of mental illness. Ari, are you finished? I asked when they'd all had their say. They looked at each other uncertainly. This wasn't the Mary Catherine they knew, the one who absorbed criticism and apologized for existing. I want to tell you all a story, I continued. It's about a woman who spent 68 years of her life being told that her value came from what she could give to others. She was told that wanting things for herself was selfish, that having dreams was impractical, that her job was to make everyone else's life easier. I stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over the small garden Tom and I had planted together. This woman gave and gave and gave until she had nothing left. She co-signed loans she couldn't afford, she emptied her savings accounts, she worked extra jobs to pay for other people's dreams while her own dreams collected dust in a closet. I turned back to face them, and I could see the discomfort in their faces. They weren't used to me talking about myself this way, claiming space and attention. Norm, then one day, this woman decided to try something different. She decided to bet on herself for once. She took all those secret dreams and turned them into something real, something valuable. And you know what happened? The world told her she was worth something. Publishers fought over her work. Readers connected with her words. For the first time in her life, she had proof that she was more than just a support system for other people's ambitions. So, Sarah started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Because here's the really interesting part of the story. When this woman finally found her voice, when she finally had something that was hers, the people who claimed to love her most tried to take that away too. They told her she was sick, selfish, changed. They couldn't stand to see her succeed because it meant they might have to take responsibility for their own lives. The silence in the room was deafening. David's face was red with anger. Linda was crying, and my children looked like I'd slapped them. "Ju, that woman is me," I said quietly. "Ga, and I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life." David exploded first, as I'd known he would. "This is exactly what we're talking about. You're being dramatic and selfish and completely unreasonable. We're your family, Mary Cat. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want you to remember your responsibilities." "It ain't right. My responsibilities?" I laughed, and it felt good to laugh at the absurdity of it all. "Shy you, David. You're 55 years old. Linda, you're 52. Sarah, Michael, you're both adults with careers and lives of your own. When exactly did my responsibility to support all of you financially supposed to end?" "It's not about support." "Chi?" Linda protested. "Nine, it's about sharing good fortune with the people who love you." "Chiu. Tiang, the people who love me." I repeated slowly. Tell me, Linda, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed money or a favor, but just because you wanted to talk to your sister?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. "True. And David, when was the last time you invited me to dinner, or asked about my writing, or showed any interest in my life beyond what I could do for you?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. Isn't it? Sarah, Michael, I love you both more than life itself. But when was the last time either of you asked me about my dreams, my goals, my hopes for the future? When was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a resource?" The room fell silent again. I could see them processing my words, trying to find arguments that would put me back in my place, back in the role of the giving tree who existed only to be harvested. "Yeah, I'm not saying I don't love you all." "Won't," I continued. "Yeah, can't. I'm saying that love shouldn't be conditional on my willingness to bankrupt myself for your convenience. I'm saying that after 68 years of putting everyone else first, I'm finally ready to put myself on the list too." Michael, my sensitive son, was the first to crack. "Mom, I never meant to make you feel used. I guess I never thought about it from your perspective." "That's the problem, Cass," I said gently. None of you ever thought about it from my perspective. You saw me as mom, as sister, as the person who fixes things and pays for things and makes everything okay. You never saw me as Mary Catherine, a woman with her own dreams and needs and limitations." Sarah was crying now too. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I guess I just assumed you liked helping us, that it made you feel needed." I did like helping you." "Hi," I admitted. "Nice, but there's a difference between choosing to help and being expected to help. There's a difference between being generous and being taken advantage of." David and Linda weren't ready to hear this. They were still stuck in the old dynamic, still convinced that I was the problem. "This is ridiculous," David said, standing up abruptly. You're acting like we're criminals or something. We're family. Family helps each other." Fret. You're right, Reg," I said. "Reg, family does help each other. But help goes both ways, David. When was the last time you helped me? When was the last time any of you offered to help me with anything?" He had no answer for that, because the answer was never. In their minds, I was the helper, not the one who needed help. I think you should all leave now, I said calmly. I need some time to think, and you all need some time to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with me going forward. Yeah, what's that supposed to mean? Linda demanded. Johan, it means that I'm not going to be your ATM anymore. It means that if you want to be part of my life, it has to be because you actually want to know me, not because you want something from me. It means that I'm setting boundaries for the first time in my life, and you can either respect them or not. They left in a flurry of hurt feelings and angry words. David slammed my back door so hard that one of Tom's coffee mugs fell off the counter and shattered on the kitchen floor. As I swept up the pieces, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The next few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. My phone, which had been ringing constantly with demands and guilt trips, fell silent. No one called to check on me, to apologize, or even to continue the argument. It was as if I'd ceased to exist the moment I stopped being useful. But other people were calling. My agent, excited about early reviews of the book. A producer from a major television network, interested in optioning the story for a limited series. Journalists wanting to interview me about the themes in my novel. Book clubs requesting virtual appearances. For the first time in my life, people wanted to hear what I had to say, not what I could do for them. My book, Narn the Invisible Woman's Rebellion, Rarn, was officially released on a Tuesday in October. I'd planned to spend the day quietly at home, maybe taking a long walk, maybe starting work on my third novel. Instead, I woke up to find my phone buzzing with notifications. The book had debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. Number 3. My secret stories, written in the margins of a life spent serving others, had resonated with enough people to land on the most prestigious bestseller list in the country. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where my family had staged their intervention, and I cried. But this time, they were tears of joy. The reviews were incredible. Raz, a powerful debut that speaks to anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own life. So beautifully written and emotionally resonant. So a story that will make you laugh, cry, and ultimately cheer for the protagonist's journey to self-discovery. But the reader reviews were what really got to me. Hundreds of women writing about how my story had helped them recognize their own patterns of self-sacrifice, how it had given them permission to want more for themselves. Cha, I felt like you were writing about my life. One reader commented. Cha, I've been the family ATM for 20 years, and I never realized how much of myself I'd lost until I read your book. Nice no. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to find your voice. Wrote another. Churro, I'm 74 years old, and I just signed up for the creative writing class I've been wanting to take for 30 years. These messages meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. I'd spent my life making other people feel better, but I'd never imagined that my words could touch strangers, could help them see their own worth. The success of the book brought opportunities I'd never dreamed of. Speaking engagements at libraries and book clubs, invitations to literary festivals. A profile in a major women's magazine about late-blooming authors who found their voices after 60. Each opportunity reinforced what I was slowly learning to believe, that I had value beyond what I could give to others. But the silence from my family continued. 3 months after the book's release, as I was preparing for a book tour that would take me to 12 cities, I finally heard from Sarah. She called on a Sunday evening, her voice small and uncertain. Raf, Mom? It's me. I read your book. Af. I waited, not sure what to expect. Ari, I'm sorry, Haf, she said, and I could hear that she was crying. Ari, I'm so sorry. I never realized. I knew you were always there for us, but I never thought about what that cost you. I never thought about what you might want for yourself. Ha. Reet, thank you for saying that, I said quietly. Ha. The character in your book, the protagonist, that's you, isn't it? That's your story. Parts of it, I admitted. My fiction is always a mix of truth and imagination. No, the part about her family not seeing her as a person, just as a function. That's us, isn't it? That's how we treated you. I didn't answer immediately. I'd spent so many years protecting my family's feelings, making excuses for their behavior, minimizing my own hurt. But Sarah was asking for honesty, and she deserved it. Yes, wow, I said finally. And since that's how it felt sometimes. She was quiet for a long moment. Shaba, I want to do better, Mom. I want to know you as a person, not just as my mother. I want to hear about your dreams and your writing and what makes you happy. I want to have a real relationship with you. That conversation was the beginning of something new between Sarah and me. She started calling regularly, not to ask for money or favors, but just to talk. She asked about my writing process, about the book tour, about how it felt to see my name on bestseller lists. She shared stories about her work that weren't requests for financial help, but genuine updates about her life. For the first time, I felt like I was talking to my daughter as an adult, as an equal. Michael took longer to come around, but eventually he called too. His approach was more intellectual, more analytical. He wanted to discuss the literary themes in my book, the way I'd structured the narrative, the influences I'd drawn from. It was a different kind of connection than what I'd developed with Sarah, but it was real and meaningful in its own way. I've been thinking about what you said, Ogjim, he told me during one of our conversations. Hi? About how we never asked about your dreams. I realize I don't even know what your favorite books are, what writers influenced you, what made you want to write in the first place. Fight. So I told him. I told him about discovering Virginia Woolf in college, about the way her essay, In a Room of One's Own, had spoken to me even when I was too young to fully understand it. I told him about the notebooks I'd hidden in my closet, about the stories I'd written in secret for 30 years. I told him about the night I'd found Tom's letter, and how it had given me the courage to finally share my words with the world. Gee, I'm proud of you, Mom. Aisha, he said when I finished. Haig, not just for the success, but for the courage it took to bet on yourself. David and Linda were a different story. As my book climbed the bestseller lists and my profile in the literary world grew, their resentment seemed to deepen. I heard through Sarah that David had been telling people that my success had gone to my head, that I'd forgotten where I came from. Hass. Linda, according to Michael, was spreading rumors that I'd abandoned my family for fame and fortune. Nah. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 68 years I'd been invisible to them except as a source of support and resources. Now that I was finally visible, finally successful in my own right, they couldn't stand it. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 6 months after the book's release. I was at home working on final edits for my second novel when David showed up at my door. He looked terrible, older than his 55 years, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. We need to talk, Ma, he said without preamble. I let him in, though every instinct told me this wasn't going to go well. Xuan Kius, I'm losing the house, he said as soon as we sat down. Jennifer left me, took the kids, and moved in with her sister. The boat got repossessed. My business is failing. I'm broke, Mary Cat, completely broke. I felt a familiar tug of sympathy, the old instinct to fix things, to make everything okay. But I also felt something new, the knowledge that his problems weren't mine to solve. I'm sorry to hear that, David. I said carefully. I need help. He continued. No, I know things got heated between us, and I said some things I shouldn't have, but I'm desperate here. I need $50,000 to save the house, just a loan. I'll pay you back as soon as I get back on my feet. Chut. No, I said quietly. He stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. What? I said. No, David, I'm not going to lend you $50,000. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, desperation. Zoe, but I'm your brother. I'm family. You have all this money now, and I'm about to lose everything. Sami, you're right. You are my brother. Why? I said. Sami. And I love you. But love doesn't mean I have to bankrupt myself to enable your poor financial decisions. Ikag, enable? None, his voice rose. I'm not asking you to enable anything. I'm asking for help in a crisis. Vlius David, this isn't your first crisis. This isn't even your fifth crisis. For the past 20 years, you've been making bad financial decisions and expecting other people to bail you out. How is that working for you? He stood up, pacing to my window, his hands clenched into fists. Seg, I can't believe you're being so cold about this. This is my life we're talking about. My home, Ag, Tagt. Khan, and what about my life? I asked. Hi, what about the 20 years I spent bailing you out of one crisis after another? What about the retirement savings I depleted, the opportunities I missed, the stress I endured because I couldn't say no to you? Ansi, Nine. That was different, Kirs, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mingsi, how was it different? Firins, because you could afford it then. We see. I couldn't afford it then, David. I just did it anyway because I thought that's what family meant. I thought love meant sacrificing myself for other people's mistakes. Nansam. He turned to face me, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Chatisen. So what am I supposed to do? Just lose everything? Shati, you're supposed to figure it out. Yeah, I said gently. Shakiisin, you're supposed to take responsibility for your choices and find a way forward that doesn't involve taking money from other people. Zam, mai. I don't know how to do that, Hai, he admitted. And for the first time in our conversation, he sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. Hai. Then maybe it's time to learn, I said. Hi, maybe it's time to talk to a financial counselor or a bankruptcy attorney, or someone who can help you make a realistic plan for your future. No, I can't believe you're abandoning me like this, he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. I'm not abandoning you, David. I'm refusing to enable you. There's a difference. He left without another word, and I knew it would probably be a long time before I heard from him again. It hurt, but it was a clean hurt, the kind that comes from doing something difficult but necessary. Linda's reckoning came a few weeks later, though hers took a different form. Instead of showing up at my door, she sent me a long, rambling email that was equal parts accusation and plea. She was furious about my Nichunasiam betrayal of the family, hurt that I'd chosen strangers over blood, and desperate for money to help her latest boyfriend's business venture. I read the email twice, then deleted it without responding. I'd spent enough years trying to manage Linda's emotions and fix her problems. She was 52 years old, and it was time for her to figure out her own life. But the real test of my newfound boundaries came when my mother called. At 89, she was still sharp, still formidable, still capable of making me feel like a guilty 12-year-old with just a few well-chosen words. Ask Mary Catherine, she said, her voice carrying all the authority of decades of motherhood. Rai, I'm very disappointed in you. Damn. Hello, Mom. Ha, I said, settling into my chair for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Rai, David told me what happened when he came to see you. I can't believe you turned your back on your own brother in his time of need. Ni, I didn't turn my back on him, Mom. I refused to give him money. Same thing, we, she said dismissively. Family helps family, Mary Catherine. I raised you better than this. You raised me to put everyone else's needs before my own. I said. You raised me to believe that my value came from what I could do for other people. But you didn't raise me to have boundaries or self-respect. Try. Don't you dare blame me for your selfishness, she snapped. Salsesa. I raised you to be a good person, to care about others, to understand that family comes first. Sama, And I did understand that, Mom. For 68 years, I put family first. I put everyone first except myself. And where did it get me? Broke, exhausted, and invisible to the people I'd sacrificed everything for. Cha-chong, you're not invisible now. Cha-ch, she said, and I could hear the resentment in her voice. Cha-chin, you're all over the internet with your book and your interviews. You're too good for your family now. Dits, I'm not too good for my family, Royce, I said patiently. Jertsis, I'm just not willing to be the family ATM anymore. No, that book of yours, she continued. Wrong, it's embarrassing, airing our family's private business for the whole world to see. What will people think? No, it's fiction, Mom. And even if it weren't, I have the right to tell my own story. Mom, no, you have a responsibility to protect your family's reputation. I have a responsibility to myself too. I said. And for the first time in my life, I'm honoring that responsibility. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, but I felt oddly peaceful afterward. I'd said what I needed to say, and I'd done it without apologizing for my success or my choices. My book tour was a revelation. In city after city, I met women who saw themselves in my story. They came to my readings with tears in their eyes, sharing their own experiences of being taken for granted, of giving until they had nothing left, of finally finding the courage to say no. In Portland, a woman in her 70s told me she'd been supporting her adult children financially for decades, even though it meant she couldn't afford her medications. Mon, your book made me realize I was killing myself to enable their irresponsibility, und she said. How I'm done being a martyr. In Atlanta, a middle-aged woman shared that she'd been caring for her elderly parents while her siblings contributed nothing, not even emotional support. I thought I was being noble, Heis, she said. But really, I was just being a doormat. Nah. In Denver, a young mother told me she'd been letting her extended family take advantage of her free babysitting services, even though it meant she never had time for her own interests. I'm going to start charging them. She said with a laugh. And I'm going to use the money to take that art class I've been wanting to take for 5 years. These conversations reinforced what I was learning about myself, that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. That saying no to some people meant saying yes to myself. That I could be generous and kind without being a pushover. The success of my first book led to opportunities I'd never imagined. A major streaming service optioned the rights for a limited series. A prestigious literary magazine asked me to write an essay about finding your voice later in life. Universities invited me to speak about women's narratives and the importance of telling untold stories. But the opportunity that meant the most to me was smaller, more personal. A local community college asked me to teach a creative writing workshop for women over 50. Satu Writing Your Truth. Finding Your Voice at Any Age, Horizons they called it. The first class was held on a Tuesday evening in a small classroom that smelled like coffee and chalk. 12 women showed up, ranging in age from 52 to 78. They were teachers and nurses, mothers and grandmothers, women who'd spent their lives caring for others and were finally ready to care for themselves. Nos, I want you to write about a time when you made yourself small so someone else could feel big. I told them for their first assignment. The stories they shared the following week were heartbreaking and beautiful. Stories of dreams deferred, of voices silenced, of women who'd been taught that wanting things for themselves was selfish. But they were also stories of resilience, of quiet strength, of the power that comes from finally deciding you matter too. Teaching that class became one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Watching these women discover their voices, seeing them light up when they realized their stories had value, witnessing their transformation from invisible to visible, it was like watching flowers bloom. One of my students, a 65-year-old retired nurse named Dorothy, wrote a memoir about her experiences working in a veterans hospital. Another, a 58-year-old former teacher named Patricia, started a blog about navigating divorce after 30 years of marriage. A third, 70-year-old grandmother named Rose wrote poetry about her immigrant experience that brought the entire class to tears. "You've given us permission to take up space," Dorothy told me after our final class. "Mons, you've shown us that our stories matter, that we matter." That's when I realized the true value of my success. It wasn't the money, though financial security was certainly nice after years of struggle. It wasn't the fame, though I enjoyed the validation of seeing my name on bestseller lists. It was the ripple effect, the way my story had given other women permission to tell their own stories, to value their own experiences, to finally put themselves on the list of people who mattered. My second book, Nardi's The Art of Saying No, was published 18 months after the first. It was a more direct exploration of boundary setting, of the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of the courage it takes to disappoint people who've grown comfortable with your compliance. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The success of the second book brought even more opportunities, but it also brought my family back into my life in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah and Michael had maintained their new, healthier relationships with me, but David and Linda had remained distant, nursing their resentments and waiting for me to come to my senses. The catalyst for change came when my mother had a stroke. She survived, but the experience left her weakened and in need of care. Suddenly, the family dynamics that had been simmering beneath the surface exploded into the open. David called me from the hospital, his voice shaking with exhaustion and stress. "Cha's mom needs round-the-clock care," he said without preamble. "Chazi, the doctors say she can't live alone anymore." No, I'm sorry to hear that, Ma," I said. "Mo, how is she doing?" "Now, crew, she's scared, yo," he admitted, "Mom, and stubborn. She doesn't want to go to a nursing home, but none of us can afford to hire private care." Q. I waited for the ask because I knew it was coming. "So we need your help, Mary Cat. I know things have been strained between us, but this is Mom we're talking about. She needs us." How? What kind of help are you asking for, David? Far financial help. The kind of care she needs costs about $8,000 a month. If we split it 4 ways between the kids, that's $2,000 each. But Linda and I can't afford that, and Sarah and Michael are still struggling with their own bills. "So you want me to pay for all of it?" I said. "It's not all of it, but maybe most of it. You're the one with money now." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of family obligation settling on my shoulders. But this time, something was different. This time, I had tools to deal with it. "Just I'll pay for Mom's care," I said, and I could hear David's sigh of relief. "Sorry, but I have conditions." "Sorry, conditions." "Nah. I'll pay for the best care available, but I'm not paying for it alone. Everyone contributes what they can afford, even if it's just $50 a month. Everyone visits regularly. Everyone participates in decisions about her care. And everyone treats me with respect, not like an ATM with legs." There was a long pause. "Oh, that seems reasonable, Arze," David said finally. "Sin David, this doesn't mean we're back to the old dynamic. This doesn't mean I'm available to bail you out of your next financial crisis. This is about Mom, not about you." "Kshu. Job, I understand," he said, and for the first time in years, he sounded like he actually meant it. Taking care of my mother's needs became a family project in a way that surprised all of us. Linda, who'd been the most resentful about my success, threw herself into researching care facilities and interviewing potential caregivers. David, humbled by his recent failures, became Mom's advocate with doctors and insurance companies. Sarah and Michael coordinated schedules and made sure someone was always available for emergencies. And I paid the bills, but I also did something I'd never done before. I made sure everyone knew exactly what I was contributing, and I expected acknowledgement and gratitude for it. "Hark, thank you," Linda said to me one day as we sat in Mom's new assisted living apartment, watching her work on a jigsaw puzzle with her caregiver. "I know this is costing you a lot of money." Nui, you're welcome, I said simply. "I owe you an apology. She continued. Nyum. For the way I acted when your book came out. I was jealous, I guess, and hurt that you didn't want to share your success with us the way you'd always shared everything else. I was willing to share, I said. But I wasn't willing to be taken advantage of anymore. There's a difference. Nah, I see that now, Shu, she said. Hi, I'm proud of you, you know. For the books, for standing up for yourself, for all of it. It was the first time Linda had ever said she was proud of me, and it meant more than I'd expected. David's apology came later, and it was more complicated. He'd lost his house, as he'd predicted, and was living in a small apartment across town. His business had failed completely, and he was working as a sales associate at a furniture store, making a fraction of what he'd earned before. Why, I've been thinking about what you said, Jai, he told me during one of our visits to see Mom. Chai, about taking responsibility for my choices, about not expecting other people to bail me out. Tai, and? Yeah. Hi, and you were right. I've been making bad decisions for years and expecting you to fix them. I never thought about what that cost you, what it meant for your life. Daichi, thank you for saying that, I said. Faichi, I'm in therapy now, he continued. Saiti, trying to figure out why I kept making the same mistakes over and over, why I felt entitled to your money, your help, your sacrifice. Nast, what have you learned? What? He was quiet for a moment, staring out the window of Mom's apartment. What? I learned that I never saw you as a person, he said finally. Why? I saw you as a function, the person who fixed things, who made problems go away. I never thought about what you wanted or needed or dreamed about. Nay, that's a hard thing to realize about yourself, I said gently. Nah, it is, but it's also liberating in a weird way. Because now I can start seeing you as who you really are, not just as what you can do for me. So, these conversations with my siblings were healing in ways I hadn't expected. Not because they erased the years of being taken for granted, but because they acknowledged those years and committed to doing better going forward. My relationship with my mother was more complicated. The stroke had left her physically weakened, but mentally sharp, and she struggled with the role reversal of needing care from her children. She was grateful for the comfortable assisted living facility I'd chosen for her, for the private caregiver who helped her with daily tasks, for the financial security that allowed her to age with dignity. But she was also resentful of my success in ways she couldn't quite articulate. During one of my visits, she brought up the book again. Horse, I still don't understand why you had to write about family things, she said. Why you had to make our private business public. It's fiction, Mom. I reminded her. And even if it weren't, those are my experiences too. I have the right to tell my own story. But what will people think of us, of how we raised you? They'll think you raised a daughter who found her voice. Hi, I said. They'll think you raised someone strong enough to overcome the limitations that were placed on her. Is that how you see it, that we limited you? I considered the question carefully. I think you raised me with the tools you had based on the world you knew. But that world taught women that their value came from serving others, from being invisible, from never asking for anything for themselves. I had to learn different tools to survive in a different world. She was quiet for a long time. I'm proud of you, she said finally. I don't understand it all, but I'm proud of you. Swaraz. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I might have wanted, but it was enough. My third book, Nax Oris, Choosing Yourself, A Guide to Late Life Reinvention, mine was published 3 years after the first. By then, I'd become something of an accidental expert on women's empowerment and boundary setting. I was invited to speak at conferences, to write articles for major publications, to appear on television shows as a commentator on family dynamics and women's issues. The success was surreal sometimes. I'd go from teaching my community college writing class on Tuesday evenings to appearing on national television on Wednesday mornings. I'd spend my days writing in the same kitchen where my family had once staged their intervention, then fly to New York for meetings with publishers and producers. But the most meaningful moments were still the small ones. The emails from readers who'd found the courage to leave toxic relationships after reading my books. The women in my writing classes who'd discovered their own voices and were sharing their stories with the world. The conversations with my children and siblings that were finally based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. Sarah had started her own blog about social work and advocacy, inspired by watching me find my voice through writing. Michael had finished his PhD and was teaching literature at a small college, incorporating themes of women's narratives and late-life empowerment into his curriculum. Even David had started writing, keeping a journal as part of his therapy process. "Sha, you started something," Sarah told me during one of our regular phone calls. "Heart, not just with the books, but with all of us. You showed us that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become who you're supposed to be." I just showed you that it's okay to matter, Wig, I said. "Ray, that's something I had to learn myself. The financial success of my books had given me security I'd never imagined possible. I'd paid off my mortgage, established a comfortable retirement fund, and yes, I'd helped my family when they needed it. But I'd helped on my terms, with clear boundaries and expectations. I'd learned the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. More importantly, I'd learned that my voice had value, that my stories mattered, that I could be more than just a support system for other people's dreams. On the 5th anniversary of my first book's publication, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a major women's conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of 2,000 women, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. 5 years ago, where I told them, where I was invisible. I was 68 years old, widowed, broke, and convinced that my value came from what I could do for other people. I had stories to tell, but I kept them hidden because I didn't believe anyone would want to hear them. I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. I could see myself in so many of them, women who'd spent their lives making themselves small so others could feel big. Today, I want to tell you that it's never too late to find your voice. It's never too late to matter. It's never too late to choose yourself. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. But more than the applause, it was the faces I saw that mattered. Women crying, women nodding, women who were seeing themselves reflected in my story and realizing that they too had the power to change their lives. After the speech, dozens of women approached me with their own stories. A 70-year-old grandmother who'd just started college. A 55-year-old woman who'd left her marriage after 30 years of emotional abuse. A 62-year-old teacher who'd just published her first novel. "Stam, you gave me permission to want more," one woman told me. "Stang, you showed me that I could be more than just what other people needed me to be." That night, in my hotel room, I called my family. Not because I needed anything from them, not because they needed anything from me, but because I wanted to share my joy.